I'd now like to Karin Smyth to continue the case for the proposition.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to be not in Westminster tonight. Unlike your other speakers, the ERG decided that they didn't need me there this evening to dismantle what's left of the Tory party. So I am now here to convince you why these schools are a public disaster, given the title of this talk. I'm going to tell you why. Firstly, they're a disaster because they deprive my constituents' children of opportunities based on their parents' economic status, because they help create a more unequal society, and that's actually really bad for us all. And thirdly, their presence is enabling the chronic underfunding of our state sector by this government. So let's consider the idea that opportunity is dependent on the wealth of our families. Now, my home is in Bristol, a prosperous city, but a divided city. Of all the 650 parliamentary constituencies in this country, mine sends the fewest number of young people to university in the country, at less than 20%. In some parts of my constituency, it's 5%. We also have the poorest uptake of higher level apprenticeships and the lowest academic qualifications in the UK. And as a result, we have some of the poorest incomes and the worst health outcomes in the country. Now, a few years ago, when my children were born, I attended a parenting class. It may surprise many of you that some of us parents actually try and find out how to do that parenting thing. And at the parenting class, people talk about what they want for their young people. Totally unanimous agreement. What we want our children to be happy, to be fulfilled, to have a rounded education, to learn about working and being together, to learn about community, to have a better life. Every parent wants the best for their children. But what is best? Now, some parents make a calculation that what's best is based on cash and not community. Parents accessing private school tell me about the marvellous sport, the fantastic music, the great performance opportunities. But you know, £250,000 a year in your lifetime can buy you an awful lot of cricket coaching. Now, some parents are more open about the fact that private schools will give their children a better chance of A stars, a better career, perhaps as a doctor, a better university, believing that the caring, sharing values of community they say they want will somehow be acquired along the way. Now, the return on parental cash investment is perceived to be good. But, as my colleague has said very ably before me this evening, the reports show that the difference is very marginal when you take into account socio-economic background. Fees are rising, and the market appears to be resilient. But what really is the good that's been bought in this marketplace by parents? Few parents ever admit that the good being bought for them is the influence, the contact, the status that's achieved in relations to others. It's a good that requires a phenomenal amount of losers, and that is no joke. That's not to say that those of you who attended private schools have not or will not continue to work and have talent. It's not your fault. In fact, I agree. I think private school pupils lose out and are deprived of a great deal of opportunities. But the inequality faced by the children in my community is not their fault either. No one's responsible for the economic status of their parents, but their futures should never depend on it. So public schools, private schools, however you want to define them, are a disaster because their success depends on perpetuating a vicious circle of education and contacts to secure wealth that is in turn used to secure more education and contacts for just 7% of our population. Now, this brings me on to my second area of concern. Private schools actively make all our society unequal, and this is a disaster for us all. While just 7% of children attend fee-paying schools, the top tiers of the organisations running our society are packed with the privately educated. The 75% of top judges, 45% of Conservative MPs, a third of the FTSE 100 CEOs, over 50% of journalists and British Oscar winners all from private schools. Now, I say to this House tonight, don't you think it's a bit odd that many of those making decisions about our society are the ones that were shut away from it? Now, less odd, perhaps, is what is a very human tendency for us to be drawn to people like ourselves throughout our lives. People who look like us, people who sound like us, people who have similar experience to us. That's how the status, the networks, and the contacts work. If the 93% of children who aren't accessing these opportunities at the right time don't have that ability, the consequences on their ability to lead a fulfilled and happy life are reduced. Now, there is plenty of evidence that economically unequal societies are themselves less happy, less cohesive, and less healthy. The cost of this underinvestment in all our children is one we will all end up meeting over the cost of their lifetimes. The child that could sort out climate change, who could bring peace to the Middle East, or could write that Oscar-winning script, can be found in my constituency. As the Prime Minister, I think she's still the Prime Minister, but again, I haven't had a chance to check, as she has said frequently, we want a country that works for everyone. In fact, the UK Tory government policy is dominated by an alleged concern for inequality and social mobility. In its industrial strategy, for example, the government says we need to narrow the disparities between communities in skills and education and remove barriers faced by workers for underrepresented groups in realising their potential. That's what our country needs. Now, I'm not alone in this room for wanting to have greater social mobility, but in my job, I see a lot of good intentions. I hear a lot of warm words. And I see a lot of hard work from people trying to reduce that problem in my constituency. But it is tinkering at the edges of a system stacked against the children in my constituency, and private schools are fundamental to that system. Which leads me to my final concern: the facilitating of chronic underfunding of state schools. Now, we've already heard, and I heard some laughters, but 20 years ago, many of us were very proud of that phrase, education, 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 after the last 18 years of Tory cuts. It heralded a huge investment by the Labour government in our state system. Not a few quid of the little extras that the Chancellor dished out at the last budget. We wanted every child to matter. And in Bristol and across the country, we drove up standards in the state sector, we rebuilt schools, and it succeeded. Results improved, and parents began returning to our city-state schools. Private schools actually began to close in Bristol and elsewhere, with some converting to academies, welcomed with open arms. And parents took another look at that return on investment, and numbers started to fall. Now let's just contrast the 65% increase in state funding under a Labour government with the 8% decrease we've had since 2010. Cuts with no assessment of the impact on children, on outcomes, on learning, or how to meet the skills gap. Now, everyone working, every parent knows that the state sector is facing a crisis in funding. The state sector ship is once again holed under the waterline, but those with money have access to a lifeboat in the private sector. Now, does anyone in this house tonight really think that those with access to the lifeboat of private education are really fit to fix the state sector? So in conclusion, when you think about this motion tonight, I put it to you that private schools offer a glass floor to the privileged and a barrier of opportunity to the rest. Now, I know I've convinced you tonight. I can see it in your faces. And I know more and more people in this room and in the country do want to do something about inequality and reform. But those who are part of the club are never going to sanction reform, because turkeys, as we know, never vote for Christmas. Now, the door of opportunity is being slammed in the face of my constituency. Private schools are a disaster to them, to our country, and it's a disaster this country can no longer afford. The influence is a disaster, as the motion says, and I commend it to this House.